a time of reflection, and a time of awakening. And the article, the editor indicated, well, what could we have done differently as a community? Were Larry and Jean aware of local dementia services? Did stigma dissuade them from sharing their medical condition with friends, family, and neighbors? Were trusted individuals there with the knowledge to help them? And it ended with a call to action, which is, what could we as a community have done differently? It really broke my heart, obviously, and I think I can see that it has an impact on all of you. And I started to think about it and realized, well, and I know Tom has boys and who are always looking for good stuff to do and show their muscles at their age. And what if the neighbors had all said, why don't we just bring the trash cans over to the end of the street? That would make it easier. Everybody on something. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's get you some water. But nobody knew Jean had dementia. Nobody knew she had dementia. So there's the stigma. There's the stigma that we have to talk about. And it wasn't his fault that nobody did anything to help. But after a session like we've gone through and that we're going to talk about further, I'm sure you can come up with many things that we could have done or that they could have done to help Jean and Larry. And so I'm here, and you're all here for the Jeans and the Larrys that we all know, and the Jeans and the Larrys that we will meet, and the Jeans and the Larrys that we don't even know exist. But as I heard this morning already, you've identified some even in the congregation. So I just wanted to start with that to give you that sense that, everybody has a role to play.
I think people don't talk about it, and I was just thinking long ago, I was at a church in San Diego, and this couple's name was George and Georgia, and I was in the ladies' room, and as I left, I didn't realize anyone was in there, and I turned off the light, and I heard this, oh, it's dark. So I think, I turned the light back on, and I asked her what I could do to help, but I thought, gee, I don't think anybody realized that he was dealing with his wife, who really was far needing somebody to help.
Yeah. And as we talked about earlier, and as the reason I bring this story is that it wasn't just about Jean. It was about Larry too. And it wasn't just about Georgia. It was about George too. And so we have to figure out a way, because our healthcare system is not meant to help Larry when the physician or clinician is taking care of Jean. There's no reimbursement for that. There's no way to even ask the questions because of HIPAA and other things about how the loved ones are suffering or what they need. And so thank you so much for bringing that up. So the first thing, no matter what we decide to talk about here, whether it's within our church community or the broader community, is this sense of stigma. This community is very tight, the church community. So is Findlay. Findlay's a small town. And they still didn't tell anyone for 3 years, and the business went under. Keep that in mind. Now, the second thing I want to, before we get to this, talk about is the concept of contextualization, meaning it's a tough word, but it's all about it's what we talked about last week. Why do we think what's happening in the brain, as far as what we know and our knowledge is what matters? It's not. There is a person in there, and there's a spirituality in there, and that matters more than what somebody is capable of doing. This is not about our cortex, and we know that here. And then the last thing that I want to mention, and this is something I read this morning actually, our memories are flawed, but God's isn't. Isn't that beautiful? Now, there is a sense that says you wish maybe God would forget a few of the things that we have done. I get it. But we are in a place where we know what good is. We know what we should be doing. So with that in mind, what I want to do is just go through a few things and then open it up for the rest of you to make some decisions. When we talk about dementia-friendly faith communities, the first thing is, of course, understanding that individuals living with dementia are spiritually alive and thriving. Thriving is an amazing word that we would not have thought about when I said the first three words that come to your mind when you think about dementia. There's a soul and there's a heart in there, and we have to find it. Focus on the individual's gifts, talents, strengths, and ability rather than their limitations. Now, you have somebody who has been the chair of XYZ committee for quite a while, not going so well right now. What do? Think of how that person is going to feel if you say, you know, I think we need someone else to be the chair because you have forgotten this, and this wasn't paid, etc. I get it. There's a committee to run. I absolutely get it. But is there a way to focus on that person's gifts? Because what we find is that that individual is able to, has amazing artistic talents. Saying, you know what, we have never taken advantage of your ability to write beautiful missives. We could get somebody else to do this stuff while you do that. It's that graceful cover up and the pivot. Why not? Why not think about what it would feel like to be robbed of that task? That's something that can resonate certainly with all of us sitting in this room. Support the individual through stages of grief. The concept of grief and loss are not as simple as people think they are, because as we know, that individual with dementia is still there, but not there. And the phrase we use is ambiguous loss. It's a loss that somebody else can't understand with you because they might say, you know, my mom died 3 years ago. At least you have your mom. Sounds like the right thing to say. I get it. But what that person is going through is, I have her, but I don't have her. You don't understand. We have trouble with ambiguity. And this is a phrase to really think about: ambiguous loss or ambiguous grief. We have people in the room here today who are experiencing ambiguous grief.
But doesn't that also involve the person who has the dementia?
Yes.
I mean, they've lost things. They are somewhat aware that they can't do what they used to do.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting because at different phases, your grief or your losses are different. I will often say to people, and I know this does not sound like a kind thing to say, but that's the hardest phase. Once you no longer, for the individual, once you no longer know that you used to know how to do this, your life can be very joyous. But that phase is extraordinarily difficult. And so you are absolutely right. However, that next phase is even more difficult. It's easier for the person, but it's not easier for the care partners. Margaret, did you?
I was going to say, I was going to give an example that speaks to that, of a volunteer organization that handled it very well with my mother.
Let's hear that.
She had been, well, she was a nurse, so she had worked at the local hospital for a very long time. And then after she retired, she was volunteering in the gift shop. And she had always loved math. That was kind of like, and she was always good at math. And then suddenly she was not able to count the money at the end of the day. It was like almost an overnight thing that she had known how to do it. And then suddenly she didn't know how to do it. And it was terribly frustrating to her. And she was weeping about it, that it bothered her so much that she suddenly wasn't able to do this thing that had always been her skill. And she went to the volunteer coordinator and said, I need to stop volunteering. I can't do this anymore. And the volunteer coordinator said, you know what? We can have somebody else count the money. You are so wonderful when people come in and you are so great about greeting them. And she said, we have such a shortage of volunteers. We don't have enough people to fill all the slots that we have. And we, we really appreciate and need your help. We don't care about counting money. And I mean, she just handled it so well.
Love it.
And then I think this woman was my 10th grade English teacher also, so it's someone I know. She was coming in special to count the money when my mother did a shift. So I think that's an example of someone kind of helping that type of situation go well.
And I think it also brings to the surface that in our society, we think that numbers matter. Well, I helped 6,000 people, or I made this change, or this is how much somebody was able to donate. But when you can affect one life, like I heard from so many of you this morning, that's why we're all here. So that's a absolutely beautiful story. Did you want to add something? No? Oh, okay. Okay, I could see your, I almost thought you had an epiphany. You're working on it, okay. Another at the bottom here is to be patient and understanding someone's change in behavior and appearance. Appearance is a very big one to think about. Somebody who is always dressed in a certain way and all of a sudden, I'm Jewish and the Yiddish word would be they're disheveled. People, it's just kind of like, really? They came out like that? What do you do? Somehow we have to let them know they look okay. So we had an incident not that long ago of someone who was not able to, they had their one to put their lipstick on because they always looked perfect. But for some reason, she thought the lipstick was meant to be on her eyebrows. What do? The family was aghast. You can't let her do that. But she thought she looked beautiful. She was so proud of herself. And what the staff were doing is every day they would come in and say, oh, love what you've done with the eyebrows. The family, on the other hand, did not feel that way. And they felt that there was no dignity there because they did not understand what we're talking about today. This was in a care community and the family actually took her out.
Oh.
Because that's not how mom should look. Now, this was a not-for-profit religious organization, and they lost a considerable amount of money from these donors. They had to make the choice. Do we do the, looked like a clown. But she was so happy. And they made the decision, the tough decision, that her life mattered. This is the tough stuff. This is the tough stuff. How can we move on? Maybe we can move on. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk just some specific kinds of things. And I don't mean to be just like, oh, that's so simple, but sometimes you are going to have to decide how big do you want to go and how every small activity matters. Every action you choose to take matters. All I'm going to do is lay out kind of a range. Certainly, if you know that people come in a certain door and somebody has dementia, you could have somebody who understands all of this, who is greeting them. Hi, Jane. I don't know if you remember, I'm Bonnie, and this is where I'll take you to your seat. Makes a really big difference if you know that, and that's called person-directed care. You know she is not going to be able to do that. That may not work for anybody else, but you've affected her life and she's coming here. Reserve parking spots close to entrances. This is a really very fascinating one because as we talked about, spatial senses change and somebody needs to know, I can just walk these 4 steps and get in. I have a colleague who says we will not be a just society until we no longer need handicapped parking spots. I did not understand that. I felt like, what are you talking about? It's wonderful. We should all know that there are people who will need those, and they don't need the stigma. Let them park there, and we can park further away. And as long as we still need to do that, we're not all there yet. Tom, you were nodding your head. I never ever thought about it. Did you, Mark, ever think about it? Never ever thought about it. We're kind of halfway there. Okay. What about the clearly marked entrances and pathways? When I first was coming here last week, Margaret said, I'll meet you downstairs. Getting to 222 is hard. Well, I took that down and I even thought about it. Think about how wonderful this building is for small children, for the preschool, et cetera, and being able to see where your locker is or where your little cubby is, et cetera. That's beautiful. But what if somebody can't figure out where the service is? The arrows are great, but nothing personal, but they're not that great. You know, and the colors of the arrows as an example. Did you all know, and I've got 2 pharmacists in the group here, that as you age, you cannot see the blue-violet spectrum the same way. That's why yellow glasses, when you ski, what the yellow glasses are doing is making it so that you're not having the same impact for the blue-violet spectrum. I wonder if anybody at the pharmaceutical company understood that when they developed the little purple pill, which older adults as they age cannot see, it's brown. And I didn't bring those kind of glasses with me, but when you've got someone with dementia and you say to them, you need to take your purple pill, there is no purple pill. We need to understand what it looks like to an individual who is experiencing changes, both are normal, that are normal changes as we age, but also those that are exacerbated by conditions like dementia. And again, the contrasting text and background colors. As an example, if you are going to have a aging in place program for Habitat for Humanity, you need to understand that the person is going to not be as incontinent as quickly if you have a toilet seat that is a different color. And how much does the toilet seat cost? Now, how much did that fall cost in the hospitalization, and then now they can, et cetera, and they're incontinent, they can't get to the toilet, they can get there, but they can't see it because everything looks the same. We train actually the aging in place affiliates to do that. These are the kinds of simple things. So as we look at the cabinets, if this is where the glasses go, and it's, why can't we put a picture of the glasses on there? Why can't we show where the cups are? So that somebody is empowered to say, I can get, Mom, can you get your own glasses or get your own dishes? You know, there's a picture there. Oh, okay. But if it's not there and Mom doesn't know where to go because look at all these doors, look at all these cabinets, what's going to happen? You're going to do it for her because she's going to say, I can't do it. Or you're going to get frustrated because 5 minutes later, she's still opening cabinets.
It's
Yes.
like going back to when children are little and you're teaching them where to put things. And so, you know, they say if you ask the children to do it, don't do it for them because you're
Yes.
giving them the impression that they don't know how to do it right.
Yes.
So, I mean, I love that idea and turning things, you know, there's a book, it's the Michelle Silverstein book about the man who's so nice to the little boy and the little boy grows up and the man's
The tree.
chair. Giving Tree?
The giving tree, the
Oh.
giving tree, yeah. Yeah, no, you are 100% right. And the way we word it and the way we're changing things in Ohio is from this not focusing on the deficits, but the strengths. And that's what we do, and that's kind of the Montessori approach to education, and I'm sure that's, you're nodding your head. there is this sense of let's figure out what they can do in the natural environment. So as an example, if I make your peanut butter and jelly sandwich for you, that's great, you can sit there and eat. But if I put the 2 pieces of bread out, and I put the peanut butter and I put the jelly, just kind of like what you're saying, I say, Mom, let's make a sandwich. There's the peanut butter, it's right there. Make it simple so that we're building on somebody's strengths. And you know what? Remember on the bottom shelf, that feeling that I did it is not going away. How powerful and wonderful is that? And at the same time, you have to realize when you have dementia, most likely you have what are called comorbid conditions, which would mean you might have arthritis. And wow, this is kind of nice. You have just had an OT activity like this. You're using your brain and you're using your body. How beautiful is that? How beautiful is that? Somebody who has always been gardening. I don't know if your gardens out here, but think about it. If I say, oh, look at those marigolds, somebody's got a dead head there. Terrible word, I know. But they're gonna know that word. How great. And they did it. Yes.
I have a neighbor who put her daughter had to go to Kemp House for memory issues, and to help her with that transition, that's exactly what they did. She loves to work in the garden and do flowers, and she immediately just went right in and was at peace there. So they went to her strength.
But the only way you can go to strengths, thank you, and Kemper House is a perfect example of that. And Greg Sinney, who is the CEO of that, is really into the strength base. So that's wonderful to hear. I hope it's okay if I share that story with him. Thank you. That sense of you have to know the person though, that would not have worked with somebody else. So the question becomes for all of us here, how do we get to know the person? How do you know what would work with them? That's called person-directed or person-centered care and caring. That if you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia, just like each and every one of you are completely different. If I don't have my Lipton tea first thing in the morning, because it costs next to nothing, I have a very frugal family growing up, it's what my mother did. That's what you have to do for me. But you have to know that. And if I don't have and I used to go give speeches around the country, people knew that I liked tea. They come up with the fancy teas. And I'm going, you just spent $6 on this. And I wanted my little Lipton tea where you get 100 of them for $3. You got to know the person and know not just everything about them, but for example, with your mom, Margaret, what are the 3 things that would make her day? What are the 3 things that are so important? They're not huge things. For me, it's Lipton tea. For somebody else, it's going to be something else. How do you figure that out? How do you know each other? When we're in a small community like this, we know each other. Let's move on. Something as simple as a projection screen so that somebody can see. Now, I know there's going to be some nods here who are going to say, has nothing to do with dementia. I'm getting older. My this is like so great. But seriously, consider non-glare floors. Why do we think clean has to be shiny? Do you know that somebody who has cataracts and somebody who has, again, the dementia because they're not able to think about it? If you had asked me to design this, I would say that for somebody with dementia, they are not able to tell whether this is a step down, a step up, because they can't see the dimension. That's why you see on street corners the yellow, because somebody knows when there is the yellow that it actually, hopefully, they're able to tell that. But you do this. How many of you have ever in the middle of the night or any time missed that bottom step? Unaccounted right or whatever. Yeah, that's, pardon me,
That's when you fall.
that's when you fall. The relationship between falls and dementia is huge. We have to ensure that we are doing everything in our space. Now,
And just to mention, next week, our class is on preventing falls.
really?
Yeah, and an expert from the area is coming.
Well, what's interesting is that, and we do a lot of work on falls, is that when you talk about preventing falls, the one area that the guidance doesn't work for us is dementia. In part because if I'm sitting here and you can teach me everything I need to know about not getting up because I hurt my hip or whatever it is, but if I have dementia and I'm going to forget that, I'm gonna get up. And so dementia and falls are, but again, that's next week. But you're absolutely, but that feeling and what happens to our bones when that happens, you know, an osteoporosis, remember, people with dementia have comorbid conditions. Our job is to make the environment, and non-glare flooring is a extraordinarily important thing. Now, however, I happen to know, because I have this kind of ESP, that you're not going to get rid of these. I can tell you, and the person who is going to be here next week can give you all sorts of guidance, and one of those guidances is going to be get rid of the throw rugs. That's it, get rid of the throw rugs. But I gotta tell you something. If you said to me, you know, you need to get rid of your throw rugs, and I would say, yep, that sounds, I really should, I know that. Who here thinks I'm gonna get rid of my throw rugs? It's not gonna happen if you know me. Because I'll say, I'll be fine, but I'll just tell them I'm getting rid of my throw rugs. You have to know the person well enough to know, you know, that's probably not the best guidance because that was their grandma's throw rug and they're not gonna get rid of it. And so instead, let's figure out a way to do X, Y, and Z. Yes.
No, I'm just. It's a year.
Sorry about that.
No close.
So again, it's one thing to give guidance. It's another to know whether it's going to be working or not. Okay. A respite zone. I assume that you have here place for families if a child is going to be boisterous and they want to stay at the service, etc. Here's a room you could go to. Oh, you do? Okay.
The living room.
Yeah. Well, if you think about somebody with dementia and you are the family member and you say, you know, I'm not bringing her anymore because she's disruptive. Be kind of nice to be able to have a little place where we can either, I mean, because not everybody can accept disruptiveness. Just go and relax for a little bit.
And you know, when you're talking about that, I think there are places, at least I know when we first came to the church, I didn't realize, I call it catacombs. The church was filled and I'd go down to the basement, but you could hear the service in the, you know, now it's what, the Hazelton theme room, but you could hear that and maybe we should make that more obvious. Because then I know in the Catholic church, a lot of times there's like a little room in the back that you can go into that's soundproof and it well, you can hear that, but I think sometimes we have things and we don't necessarily let people know, or some of us have been coming so long, we think, oh, everybody knows, and they don't.
Excellent point. So as an example here, they'll also create a library reading room. If you go on a couple of websites, and I will give you one that I'm affiliated with, there are some wonderful guidelines, and we call them quick tips. That are just 2 pages on things like how do you communicate with somebody with dementia? How do you prevent X, Y, and Z? And what we shouldn't say allow, we encourage individual organizations to do, and I'm not a lawyer, so I know this is the wrong word, but to co-brand them. So if you thought these things are really interesting and would be helpful to congregants, then what you would do is say, you know, we're gonna put our logo on this too. And we would facilitate that so that you can spread the word and have information on dementia and care partnering and caregiving for many people, not just everybody that is sitting here today. So we can also, certainly talk about that. Tom, the next slide, please. What about transportation? Somebody's really struggling to get here. There's one thing to say give transportation, but what about, can't we each take somebody? I can pick somebody up if I think that they're a little nervous about driving, or perhaps shouldn't be driving, or their perception, their depth perception is off a little bit. Let's prevent that little fender bender. Let's prevent the person from having a problem. We can offer transportation. We don't want to make sudden changes in a service. Now, for example, I know that today is going to be a beautiful choir and the instruments, etc. We should let people know it's not going to be our regular service, because as soon as that cello starts, it's going to be like, huh? Wait, I thought we always go to page 5. Huh? We prepare people for any kind of change. And then think about evening services, Bible study, etc. As we get older and with dementia, driving at night is not something people are terribly interested in doing. And so to think about some of these times, and of course, as you're so good at doing for everyone, have as much online as possible. Yes, Tom, the next, just for time's sake. Okay, we're not going to go through all of these because these are just other activities. You're going to get this for time's sake. But one of them is to host a Dementia Friends session by becoming a Dementia Friends champion. You all went through a Dementia Friends session. As much as I love all of you, I can't come back here every week. If there's another person that I'd love to, but we can train. This is a train the trainer program, and anything that I talked to you about last week, you can do it. So if there are 3, 4, or 5 people in the congregation that would like to become Dementia Friends champions, meaning it can do exactly what I was doing, but probably better, that you can help people in the community that way. And so I would really love to advocate for that if there's anyone who is interested in that. Next up.
And Bonnie, I just want to mention too, that last week's class is on our YouTube channel
Oh, okay.
for our church.
Right, okay. Engage youth as volunteers in dementia-related services. One of the most difficult things is, how are we going to get the next generation to understand this? Kemper House, I'm so glad you brought it up, does a lot of work with OSU students. And they do this very cool thing called memory discos, which is like a silent disco with the music that people would love. And the students from OSU come to Kemper House. It's amazing. And it's, how do we help people understand what's happening to grandpa? Our job, it's great that we're all here, but we need to help our youth. They do service projects or things. They need to understand what is going on, because what we know now about dementia is, it's true, there's no way to prevent it, but the kinds of things that we can do to make it not happen in the way it's happening are the same with any chronic disease. Eat right, exercise, brain health, all of the things, sleep well, etc. These are the kinds of things that you must start early, like with any chronic illness. So we need to spread that word. That I will often say to folks, like, oh, when did you start, when did you start aging? And they'll often say 65 or whatever. And I will say to students, well, we're all aging from whenever you think the cycle starts, with conception or birth. How come when you do it when you're 10 years old, it's a great thing, and when I do it, it's young? Right? How come? It's all aging. And so these are the kinds of things that we can engage our students in so that we have a supportive community. Okay.
I have a comment.
Yes,
This is a stretch and this isn't really what we're talking about, but
doesn't matter.
4 or 5 years ago, I think
Okay,
I was visiting a Worthington High School friend that lives in Austin, Texas, and her church has I forget what they call it, but like a dementia group, if you will.
Mhm.
And people would come to the church that were affected and their caregivers, whoever would drop them off. And they were there from like, I don't know, 9 o'clock to like 12 or 1 o'clock. And they would start with coffee and snacks and they would do music, they would do dancing, they do different things. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And they had poster boards of like, you know, what Mark's background is and
Yes.
about his family or whatever. It was just amazing. And so every so often, I think maybe it was weekly, but every so often, like maybe once a month, the caregivers would come at the end of the time. So if it's over at 1, the caregivers would come at 12 and have a special meeting like with you or somebody to discuss whatever. And then at 1 o'clock, they would leave with their person, but it was the most beautiful thing I've ever
so
experienced.
go back, please, if you don't mind, Tom, and I went through it, and let's see, maybe it's let's go back one more, it should say memory cafes. That is what you're just describing. We are actually creating an Ohio model for memory cafes. And faith-based organizations and libraries are core to that, because when you have the space and have the sense of community as well. So yes, those are called memory cafes and they are extraordinary.
They stopped it because of COVID. I think it's kind of fallen apart. They've lost some volunteers, et cetera, but it was just so really neat to see it.
Oh, it's absolutely extraordinary, in part because it understands that this does not just affect the individual who is living with it, it impacts the care partners as well, and it gives them respite.
Yeah.
So I'd be very, very happy to talk about that, and the music is extraordinarily core to that. We could go ahead for time's sake. Let's see, keep going. You have a Stevens ministry here, I suspect. Stevens ministry is extraordinarily important in the field of dementia. And I would love to actually, you know, we should talk about maybe the folks who are engaged in your Stevens ministry to have them have a more greater understanding of dementia. Next, please. Why do we all have to? Why do we have to go to the same length service? What about shorter services for certain people? Why can't we have or even if it's 15, 20 people? Why not? Now, I know there's people that don't have dementia that are gonna say, I want to go to that shorter service. No, I'm not going there, so I'm saying,
We have one.
yeah, okay. And of course, but home visits, what about people who can't get out? And this, of course, where we talk about the Stephen ministry as well. What is our responsibility? But we don't know that they have dementia. We think they're just like, they don't care about us anymore. Is that really what it is? When her personality has changed, maybe we now know something different. Please tell me the next for time's sake. And some of these are more typical ones. So what we need to ask you now, if we could go to the next slide, is what are you going to do? Now, there are two ways to think about what are you going to do. What are you going to do can be things, which I was going to list, you know, we want to do this, we want to do that. That's doing. But there's another way to use the word doing. What are we doing? There's room in our lives for both. We need to do things, but we also need to make a difference. And the question is, where do we start and where do we want to go? And that's entirely up to all of you. And so even though there's much more, we're going to end here because I guess I wasn't true to my word because we haven't been able to talk too much. But what do you want to, I'm just going to open the floor. What are you thinking? And this is between Tom, this is between you and the group.
I had talked with Tom. I think that it would be appropriate for us to have a session similar to these with our Stephen ministers and our deacons.
Definitely.
It would be an honor to participate in that if I could.
I don't think so, it would hurt for Session to be knowledgeable about it also. Because you never know, I think listening is a big thing, when people say I can't do anything. If you just listen to someone, sometimes, with dementia, they're living in the past and they want to talk about it. So you don't have to tell them, no, we don't live in 1920 anymore.
Remember, some of the things that we were talking about, if they were pills, we'd all be doing it. Our society doesn't think like that, so changing that frame, I love that idea, yes. How do we though, as a first step, how do we address the stigma? How do we make it so that somebody is willing to admit, I'm having trouble with mom, or I'm scared because I got to church and I didn't know where I was? How do we create that environment where people don't feel the stigma? And part of that is education and knowledge and embracing it, but we got to know, we've got to create that sense of environment, and I don't know how you do that.
Sometimes articles about things, because I know I had breast cancer many years ago and people would whisper to me, I had breast cancer, but no one ever talked about it. And I think that might be the same way. If you just you just mention it fairly frequently in the e-blast, the tower tidings, whatever, that this is something that is not unusual and we want to address it.
Yeah, there's been a lot of research lately too on the gift of vulnerability.
Oh,
So when we share about a loved one who has dementia, that invites others to share too. That means that topic is not taboo. Yeah, that's helpful.
I love that in the whole sense of, as Brene Brown has made that a popular topic, but but I will tell you that I have a granddaughter who was making one of those word clouds, and so she needed from me 10 words that I think describe me in a very positive way. And one of the words I gave her was vulnerable. And she said, no, you're supposed to do positive words. And so we're not there yet where people fully understand that being vulnerable is a good thing. And so I'm so thrilled to hear Tom say that. What else are folks thinking about? So it sounds like we're focusing first on what we can do here to help our church community. And that's, I think, a very smart way to start. On the other hand, if you are in a grocery store and you see the struggle, once we have the education, we can't unhear anything we've been hearing in here. And it's really hard to know what to do in those situations. But I think you now have some of those skills to be able to really ask the person a question. Can I help you find it? Or it looks like you're looking for cereal. My favorite is this. What is your favorite? We all need to slow down a little bit, but we need to take what we know outside of our community here as well. And I don't know what role you would all like to have in something like a dementia-friendly Worthington. I know they're moving towards an age-friendly Worthington. And so once folks here are trained as dementia champions, you can go out and make a difference in the community as well.
Is there any talk in Worthington about doing that? Where like maybe different churches get together or that kind of thing? I mean, it is a pretty tight community.
Well, the way it starts, and this is not a nice thing to say, but we are all a little bit competitive. And once one church finds out, the people at Worthington Presbyterian Church have been trained, or it is accessible. What about us? So sometimes that's what it takes, but there is a strong interest in the concept of age-friendly Worthington. And one of the most interesting concepts now is how to integrate age-friendly and dementia-friendly. And this would be a wonderful opportunity for a leadership role for the church and even advocating for that. Yes. Yes.
Okay, you've got a situation where you think you know the right thing to do. And you've helped us with some areas, and so all of a sudden we walk out, we're experts in this, we put it or not. And you do something, and the person you're doing it for gets angry about it because you didn't do it in the right way. So negative reinforcement right back at you, but okay, what do you do when you do something wrong?
Well, what do you do in life when you do something wrong?
I had the other way. I run.
Well, the question here is, who's it about? And what role do you want to play? And that's a personal decision here. That's one of the conversations that Tom and I have had. And that is, there are so many competing obligations, so many competing opportunities, that I have no idea whether area like dementia is one that bubbles up, that people say like, no, I'm going to really devote myself and think through and learn the next thing to do. Or is the priority something else? There's no right or wrong, but we're all limited. And so it really does become very personal of how much time and effort you want to dedicate to it. But I don't know you, but I know walking away is probably not the right one. Just saying. Just saying. Yes.
This past year has been very interesting for me because we moved to Friendship Village. Dave fell a year ago now. He's in a health center. And when he got out of rehab, they had to take the rehab, so there wasn't room for him to stay on the second floor. He's now on the third floor. He's been there since March, April. And that's the memory floor. And what you've said has been very helpful for me because there are people wandering in and out. I'm concerned for him because when at mealtime, where's the stimulation of conversation? He needs 24/7 care. I can't do that in the apartment. He's never lived there. But I can bring him over because your long-term insurance takes care of it in a facility. It's $15,000 a month if they have someone in your. Okay, so but things I have learned is that as people wander in, you can go in his room once in a while, there'll be somebody, a lady taking him out. It's kind of interesting. But he'll say, you're not in the right room. I understand, but it's easier for me to say, Margaret, how about if we walk down? I think I know where your room is. You need and that kind of thing. Just take a hold of her hand. Take a hold of her, touch her. Touch her. And it's, so this has been really helpful. Underneath the concern about Dave, one of the things that was family restaurants. Okay, I would take him to church over at Friendship Village this afternoon at 2:30, because that's an easy way for me to roll the wheelchair in. All the broken bones have healed, but the balance is not back. So I can roll him in there and that works. He's mentioned, oh, are you going to, with the kind of voice, you're going to, were they in the church today? Okay, we'll come this morning. I can get in the car. What do I do for a restroom? I need to know the restrooms here.
You know, how it's beyond building one.
They're working on it.
But I mean, it's the real,
But it's
that's
not
the
ready
next construction project that happens.
First of all, the maze that's here finding the thing. Do I take him in the men's restroom or do I take him in the women's restroom? He's got to have help.
Yeah.
So